The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. James Carter stared at the official seal pressed into red wax. His hands trembled as he held the envelope. This wasn't just any letter. This was the answer that could change everything. He had dreamed of this moment since he was 8 years old. Standing outside Buckingham Palace with his father, watching the guards in their scarlet uniforms and bearskin hats, his father had pointed at them and said something James never forgot. Those men protect the most important family in the world. They're the best of the best. His father was gone now. Cancer took him 2 years ago, but the dream stayed alive. James ripped open the envelope. His eyes scanned the words quickly. Then he read them again, slower this time. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum. Congratulations. You have been selected for the Royal Guard recruitment process. He closed his eyes and exhaled. The first barrier was down. But this was just the beginning. If you want to see how far James goes on this impossible journey, hit that subscribe button now. You won't believe what happens next. The recruitment center stood in central London, hidden behind ordinary-looking buildings. James arrived at 6 in the morning. The air was cold and damp. His breath came out in white clouds. 50 other candidates waited outside. Young men, all between 18 and 30, their faces showed the same mix of determination and fear. Only 5 would make it through. Maybe less. A sergeant stepped out. His uniform was immaculate. His face was stone. Listen carefully, he barked. Most of you will fail. This isn't about being tough. It's about being perfect. The royal family doesn't accept second best. Neither do we. They filed inside. The first test began immediately. Medical examination. James stripped down to his underwear with the others. Doctors checked everything. Eyes, ears, heart, lungs, reflexes. One candidate was sent home within 10 minutes. Heart murmur. He left without a word, his dreams crushed before they began. The physical assessment came next. Push-ups, sit-ups, a 2-mile run in full gear. James pushed his body to the limit. Sweat poured down his face. His muscles screamed, but he thought of his father watching those guards. He thought of the promise he made at the funeral. He would not quit. By noon, 35 candidates remained. 15 had failed the physical tests. The rest sat in a cold room, drinking water, trying to catch their breath. Then came the interview. James sat across from 3 officers. They stared at him with emotionless faces. The middle one, a colonel with gray hair and sharp eyes, spoke first. Why do you want this, Carter? James had prepared for this question. But now, sitting here, the rehearsed answer felt wrong. He decided to tell the truth. My father taught me what honor means, he said quietly. He showed me that some things are worth protecting. Worth dying for? The royal family represents our history, our values, our identity. I want to be part of that protection. I want my life to mean something. The colonel's expression didn't change. He wrote something down. If we put you in front of Buckingham Palace, another officer asked, and someone threatens the royal family, would you take a bullet for them? James didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. Even if it meant leaving your own family behind? That question hit harder. James thought of his mother. His younger sister? They'd already lost his father. Could he ask them to risk losing him too? But he knew the answer. This was bigger than one family. Yes, sir. He repeated. Without question, interview ended. James walked out not knowing if he'd said the right things or destroyed his chances. That evening, 20 candidates remained. The rest had been cut. James lay in the barracks bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new tests. Harder tests, but something the colonel said kept echoing in his mind. Something that made his blood run cold. The training doesn't break your body, Carter. It breaks your soul. And then we see if you're strong enough to rebuild it. James wondered what that meant. He was about to find out. The alarm screamed at 4:30 in the morning. James jolted awake. His body ached from yesterday's tests. But there was no time for rest. On your feet. The sergeant's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. You have 3 minutes to be outside in full uniform. Anyone late gets sent home. James scrambled. His fingers fumbled with buttons and laces. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, he stood in formation with the others. 19 men total. One bed was empty. Someone had quit during the night. The sergeant walked down the line, inspecting each candidate with cold precision. He stopped in front of a muscular recruit named Davies. "Your collar is crooked," the sergeant said flatly. Davies glanced down. The difference was barely visible, a millimeter at most. "Go home," the sergeant ordered. "Sir, I can fix it. It's just go home." The sergeant's voice was ice. "A Royal Guard doesn't make mistakes. Not even small ones." "Out." Davies stared in disbelief. 3 years of preparation, months of training, gone because of a crooked collar. He walked away with his head down, fighting back tears. The message was clear. Perfection wasn't the goal. It was the minimum requirement. The real training began that morning. They marched for hours in formation. Every step had to be identical. Every turn had to be sharp and precise. James's legs burned. His feet developed blisters that popped and bled into his socks. But he didn't break rhythm. Then came weapons training. Each candidate received an SA-80 rifle. The sergeant demonstrated how to hold it, clean it, and present it. The movements looked simple. They weren't. James practiced the same motion 300 times. Shoulder the weapon. Present. Lower. Again and again and again. His arms shook with exhaustion. His shoulders felt like they were on fire. "You think this is hard?" The sergeant yelled. "Wait until you stand guard for 4 hours without moving. Wait until tourists scream in your face and you can't even blink. This is nothing." By midday, 2 more candidates had dropped out. 17 remained. The afternoon brought the psychological evaluation. James sat in a white room with no windows. A psychologist asked him questions. Strange questions. If you had to choose between saving the Queen or saving 100 innocent people, who would you choose? James hesitated. It felt like a trap. "The Queen, sir? Why?" "Because she represents something bigger than numbers. She's the symbol of the nation. Without that symbol, everything falls apart." The psychologist wrote something down. His face revealed nothing. "Tell me about your darkest moment," he continued. James felt his throat tighten. He knew what his darkest moment was. Watching his father take his last breath in that hospital room, holding his hand as it went cold, the silence that followed, he told the psychologist everything. The words came out rough and broken. When he finished, tears ran down his cheeks. He felt weak, exposed. "Good," the psychologist said quietly. "A man who can't feel, can't protect. Remember that." That night, the candidates sat together in the mess hall. Nobody spoke much. They were too exhausted. But there was a bond forming between them. A shared suffering that created understanding without words. A recruit named Thompson sat next to James. He was younger. Maybe 19. His hands shook as he ate. I don't know if I can do this," Thompson whispered. James looked at him, saw the fear in his eyes. The same fear James felt, but wouldn't admit. "Neither do I," James said honestly. "But we're still here. That counts for something." Thompson nodded slowly. The next morning, Thompson's bed was empty. The weeks that followed were the hardest of James's life. Every day brought new challenges. Endurance marches with 60 pounds of gear. Night navigation through forests. Combat drills until his body moved on instinct alone. But the hardest part wasn't physical. It was the standing. They practiced standing at attention for hours without moving. No scratching. No shifting weight. No blinking more than necessary. Just absolute stillness. James discovered muscles he didn't know existed. They cramped and screamed. Sweat ran into his eyes, and he couldn't wipe it away. His nose itched unbearably. His knees felt like they would buckle. Time moved differently when you couldn't move. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. One afternoon during standing practice, James watched a fly land on the recruit next to him. It crawled across the man's face, into his nostril, back out again. The recruit didn't even flinch. His eyes stayed fixed forward, empty and focused at the same time. That's when James understood. This wasn't about strength. It was about erasing yourself, becoming something more than human, something perfect and still and unbreakable. 12 candidates remained when they received the news. The final selection was coming. Out of the 12, only 4 would be chosen to continue to advanced guard training. The rest would be sent to regular military service. The selection would be based on everything they'd done. Every test, every moment, every invisible mistake. James lay awake that night, calculating his chances. He'd performed well, but well enough? He thought of the candidates who'd already left. Thought of Davies and his crooked collar. Thought of Thompson, who couldn't handle the pressure. He thought of his father's voice, the best of the best. The next morning they stood in formation for the announcement. The colonel walked down the line with a folder. He would call for names. Just 4. James's heart hammered in his chest. His mouth went dry. Everything came down to this moment. Everything he'd sacrificed. Everything he'd endured. The colonel opened the folder. The silence was deafening. And then he began to read. Mitchell, the colonel's voice echoed across the parade ground. A tall recruit stepped forward. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes betrayed relief.
Paraffin, acid.
Another candidate moved from the line. James felt his chest tighten. 2 names down. 2 spots left. 8 candidates still waiting. The colonel paused. He looked down at his folder, then back at the remaining men. The silence stretched on. James could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Reynolds, Redown. 1 spot remaining. James forced himself to breathe. He thought of his mother's face when he left for recruitment. The worry in her eyes. The pride fighting against fear. He thought of his little sister hugging him goodbye. He'd promised them both he would make it. The colonel looked directly at James. Time seemed to stop. Everything James had worked for, everything he'd endured, came down to this single moment. Carter. The relief hit James like a physical wave. His knees almost buckled, but he stepped forward with the others, his face carefully controlled, his emotions hidden behind the mask they'd all learned to wear. 8 men remained in line. Their dreams ended here. Some faces stayed blank. Others showed the devastation clearly. They'd given everything and it wasn't enough. The colonel addressed the 4 who'd been selected. Congratulations. You've earned the right to continue. But understand this. What you've done so far was the easy part. The real training begins now. If you thought we were hard on you before, you haven't seen anything yet. They were given 48 hours of leave before advanced training began. James went home to see his family. His mother opened the door and immediately pulled him into a hug. She'd lost weight since he'd been gone. Worry had carved new lines into her face. Look at you, she whispered, touching his face. You're different. James saw himself in the hallway mirror. She was right. His eyes had changed. They carried something harder now. Something older. His sister Emma tackled him with a hug. She was 14, all energy and brightness. Did you really do it? Are you going to guard the queen? Not yet, James smiled. Still a long way to go. That night, sitting at the dinner table in their small house, James tried to explain what the training had been like. But the words felt insufficient. How could he describe standing motionless for hours while his body screamed in agony? How could he explain the mental warfare, the constant pressure, the feeling of being broken down to nothing? His mother watched him carefully. You can still change your mind, James. There's no shame in choosing a different path. I can't quit now, ma'am. Dad wouldn't have quit. She flinched at the mention of his father. Your dad would want you alive and safe. He wouldn't want you risking everything for this. He taught me that some things are worth the risk. They sat in silence after that. James knew his mother would never truly understand, but he also knew she would support him anyway. That's what love meant. The advanced training facility was located in a classified location outside London. James and the 3 other selected candidates arrived by military transport. No phones, no outside contact. Complete isolation. The compound looked more like a prison than a training ground. High walls, guard towers, barbed wire. Inside, the buildings were stark and functional. No comfort, no warmth. A new instructor met them, Major Blackwood. He was older than the previous sergeant, maybe 50, with scars on his hands and a face that had seen things he'd never talk about. From this moment, Blackwood began, "Your previous life doesn't exist. Your family doesn't exist. Your friends don't exist. You exist only to serve the royal family. If you can't accept that, leave now." Nobody moved. Good, let me tell you what happens next. You will learn protection protocols that have been refined over centuries. You will study history, etiquette, threat assessment, emergency procedures. You will learn to read people with a single glance. You will learn to identify danger before it materializes. You will become invisible and unstoppable at the same time. The training was unlike anything James had experienced. They spent hours studying the royal family's history, their routines, their vulnerabilities. They learned about past assassination attempts and security breaches. They analyzed each failure in excruciating detail. They trained with pistols, submachine guns, and hand-to-hand combat. They ran scenarios where they had to choose between their own life and protecting their charge. Every time the right answer was sacrifice, but the most intense training was psychological. They were placed in situations designed to break their concentration. Protesters screaming inches from their faces, people trying to provoke reactions, simulated attacks that came without warning. James learned to shut down his emotions completely, to become a statue. To exist in a state of hyper-awareness while showing no awareness at all. One night, 3 months into advanced training, Major Blackwood pulled James aside. "Walk with me," he said. They walked through the compound in silence. Finally, Blackwood spoke. "You're doing well, Carter. Better than most, but I need to know something. Why are you really here?" James had answered this question before, but something about the darkness, the isolation, the exhaustion of months of training made him answer differently. "I'm afraid my life won't matter," he said quietly. "I'm afraid I'll live and die, and nothing will change because I existed. My father died and the world just kept turning. I want to be part of something bigger, something that matters." Blackwood nodded slowly. "That's an honest answer. But here's the truth. Being a royal guard means your life matters less, not more. You become a tool, a weapon, a shield. You give up everything personal to serve something impersonal. Can you really accept that?" James thought about it. Really thought about it. "Yes, sir. I can. We'll see," Blackwood said. "Because tomorrow, we find out if you're lying." James didn't sleep that night. He lay awake wondering what test was coming, what new horror they would put him through. The next morning, they were taken to a building James had never entered before. Inside was a room set up to look exactly like a section of Buckingham Palace. Authentic furniture. Royal portraits on the walls. Everything perfect, down to the smallest detail. "This is your final test," Blackwood announced. "You will stand guard in this room for 12 hours. During that time, anything might happen. You will not move. You will not react. You will maintain your post no matter what. Fail, and you're finished." James took his position. The door closed behind him. He was alone. The first hour passed quietly. Then the psychological warfare began. The speakers hidden in the walls came to life. A recording of his mother's voice filled the room. "James, please come home. I need you. Emma needs you. We've lost your father already. Please don't leave us too." James felt his heart clench. He knew it was fake. A recording from some interview or phone call they'd captured. But hearing her voice, hearing that pain, cut through his training like a knife. He didn't move, kept his eyes fixed on the wall ahead. But inside, he was breaking. The recording continued. His sister's voice now. "Why did you leave us, James? Don't you love us anymore?" His jaw tightened. He wanted to scream that he did love them, that everything he was doing was for them, to make them proud, to give his life meaning so his father's death wouldn't feel so meaningless. But he stood, silent, motionless, a statue. The voices stopped. Silence returned. James's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Sweat ran down his back. But he maintained his position. Then the door burst open. 3 men in civilian clothes rushed in. They were shouting, aggressive. They ran straight at James. Every instinct screamed at him to react. To defend himself? To fight? He didn't move. They stopped inches from his face, screaming insults, calling him worthless, telling him he'd failed. One of them grabbed his uniform collar and shook him. James's eyes remained fixed forward, empty. He barely blinked. They gave up after 10 minutes. Left the room laughing, but James knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The hours crawled by. They tried everything. Loud noises, flashing lights, temperature extremes. The room became an oven, then a freezer. James's body shook with cold, but he stood firm. Around hour 7, they brought in someone new. An actress dressed as a member of the royal family. She walked past James, stopped, then pretended to collapse. This was the real test. The ultimate trap. Everything in James's training told him to help, to protect, to act, but this was a guard position. His orders were to maintain his post. If he broke position, he'd prove he couldn't follow protocol, that he'd act on emotion instead of duty. The woman lay on the floor, moaning. James stared straight ahead. Inside, his mind was at war with itself. What if this was real? What if someone actually needed help? But no, this was the test. This was them proving whether he could be trusted to follow orders even when everything told him not to. After 5 minutes, they carried the actress away. Major Blackwood entered the room alone. "Well done, Carter," he said quietly. "You passed the hardest part. But you still have 5 hours to go? And trust me, it gets worse." Blackwood left. The room fell silent again. James's legs had gone numb hours ago. His knees felt like broken glass. His back screamed in agony. His eyes burned from staying open, from not blinking enough. He wanted to collapse. Wanted to quit. He thought of his father again. Not the sick man in the hospital bed. The strong man from his childhood. The man who taught him to ride a bike, to stand up for himself, to never give up on things that mattered. The best of the best, his father had said. James would not fail him. The final hours were psychological torture. They played recordings of bombing sounds, simulated gunfire, screams. They were testing whether he'd break position during an attack, whether fear would override training. It didn't. When the 12 hours finally ended, Major Blackwood entered with the other instructors. James's vision was blurry. His body swayed but didn't fall. He'd maintained his post for the entire duration. "At ease, Carter," Blackwood said. James tried to move. His legs buckled. He collapsed to the floor, unable to stand. 2 instructors caught him before he hit the ground. They carried him to the medical bay, gave him water and food, let his body recover. James lay there, barely conscious, wondering if he'd passed or failed. The next morning, all 4 candidates were assembled. They'd all completed the 12-hour test, but only 3 would move forward to the final phase. Blackwood stood before them. "Mitchell, Harrison, Carter. You've been selected for final placement training. You will join the Royal Guard within 3 months. Reynolds, you'll be reassigned to the Royal Protection Unit. Still an honor, but not the Guard." Reynolds nodded, accepting his fate without complaint. James felt exhausted relief. He'd made it. He was almost there. The final 3 months were different. Less about breaking them down, more about building them into exactly what the Royal family needed: perfect, precise, professional. They learned the exact ceremonies they'd perform. The changing of the guard, the inspection drills. Every movement choreographed like a deadly ballet. They studied every inch of Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and the Tower of London. They memorized faces of foreign dignitaries, known threats, security protocols that had been secret for generations. They learned to march in formation so precisely that their footsteps sounded like a single soldier. They learned to stand so still that tourists questioned if they were real or statues. James became someone new during those months. The boy from London who'd lost his father disappeared. In his place stood something harder, more focused. A weapon forged through suffering and sacrifice. On graduation day, they stood in dress uniform for the first time. The scarlet tunic, the bearskin hat, the white belt and polished boots. James looked in the mirror and saw his father's dream made real. The ceremony was small, private, no families allowed. Just the candidates, the instructors, and a representative from the royal household. The representative, an elderly man with kind eyes, shook each of their hands. "You've achieved something remarkable," he said. "You've earned the trust of the royal family. That trust is sacred. Never forget that." James wouldn't forget. He couldn't. This moment had cost him too much. That night, they were given one final leave before starting active duty. James went home again. His mother opened the door and gasped when she saw him in uniform. "Oh, James," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. His sister stared in awe. "You look like a hero." They had dinner together. His mother told him she'd been worried sick, that she still didn't understand why he needed to do this. But seeing him now, seeing the pride in his eyes, she was starting to accept it. "Your father would be proud," she said quietly. Those words meant everything. James returned to duty the next morning. He was assigned to Buckingham Palace. The dream he'd had since childhood was now his reality. But as he took his position outside the palace gates for the first time, feeling the weight of his rifle, the heat of his uniform, the stares of tourists, James realized something. The hard part wasn't getting here. The hard part was what came next. The first day on duty started at 5 in the morning. James dressed in his full ceremonial uniform with shaking hands. Not from fear this time. From anticipation. From the weight of what he was about to become. Mitchell stood beside him, adjusting his bearskin hat. "You ready for this?" James nodded. Words felt inadequate. They marched to their positions outside Buckingham Palace. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Tourists were already gathering, cameras ready, waiting for the guards to take their posts. James took his position at the entrance gate, rifle at shoulder, back straight, eyes forward. He'd trained for this moment countless times, but nothing prepared him for the reality of it. He was standing guard at Buckingham Palace, protecting the royal family, living the dream that had sustained him through his father's death, through brutal training, through every moment of doubt. The first hour was surreal. Tourists swarmed around him, taking photos, making jokes. Some tried to make him laugh. Others waved hands in front of his face to see if he'd react. James stood motionless. He'd been trained for this. The public didn't understand what it took to stand there. They thought it was easy. Thought the guards were just decorations. They had no idea. A child approached, maybe 6 years old. He tugged on his mother's hand and pointed at James. The mother smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. He's very real. He protects the queen." The child stared up at James with wide, amazed eyes. In that moment, James felt something shift. This wasn't just about his father anymore. It wasn't just about proving himself. He was part of something that meant something to others. He represented security, tradition, stability. He stood a little straighter. The hours passed slowly. The sun climbed higher. The temperature rose. Inside his thick uniform, James felt like he was being cooked alive. Sweat ran down his back. His legs pooled in his boots. His throat was dry. His head pounded from dehydration. But he didn't move. Didn't show discomfort. This was his duty. Around hour 3, a group of teenage boys approached. They were loud, obnoxious. One of them got right in James's face. "Why, mate, you're not real, are you?" "You're a robot," his friends laughed. James stared straight ahead. The boy waved his hand, snapped his fingers, leaned in so close James could smell his breath. "I bet I can make him move," the boy said. He reached out to touch James's rifle. In a flash, James's training kicked in. His rifle came down with precision, creating a barrier. His voice was sharp and commanding. "Stand back from the Queen's guard." The boys jumped back, genuinely frightened. The crowd around them went silent. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. The teenagers slunk away embarrassed. James returned to his position as if nothing had happened. Inside, his heart raced. His first real interaction. He'd done it correctly. Followed protocol exactly. But it had felt good. Powerful. To defend his position. To show he wasn't just a statue. When his 4-hour shift ended, another guard marched out to relieve him. James executed the handover perfectly. Then he marched away, his legs barely holding him up. In the guard room, he collapsed on a bench. Mitchell handed him water. James drank it in seconds, then drank 2 more bottles. "First shift down," Mitchell said. "Only about 1,000 more to go." James laughed. It felt strange to laugh after hours of forced stillness. But that night, lying in his bunk, James felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. The weeks turned into months. James fell into the rhythm of guard duty. The early mornings, the long shifts, the ceremonial drills. It became natural, part of who he was. But then something happened that changed everything. It was a cold November morning. James was on duty at the palace gates. The usual crowd of tourists milled about. Nothing seemed unusual. Then he noticed something. A man in a dark jacket standing too still, watching too carefully. His hands were in his pockets, but his eyes were scanning the area with military precision. James's training kicked in. Threat assessment. The man's posture. His positioning. His behavior. Everything screamed danger. James couldn't break position to alert anyone. But he could send a subtle signal. He shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. A movement other guards would recognize. A warning. Mitchell, stationed 20 feet away, caught it. He sent his own signal to the guard beyond him. Within seconds, the message reached the armed protection officers inside the palace. The man in the dark jacket suddenly moved. He pulled something from his pocket and started toward the palace gates. James's mind raced. Was it a weapon? A bomb? Before the man could take 3 steps, armed officers emerged from hidden positions. They surrounded him, weapons drawn. The man was taken down within seconds, restrained, searched. It turned out he was carrying a knife and a manifesto. He'd planned to breach the gates and attack anyone inside. He'd been planning it for months. Because of James's vigilance, because of his training, the threat was neutralized before it could materialize. That evening, Major Blackwood visited the guard barracks. He rarely came anymore. His presence meant something important had happened. "Carter," he said, pulling James aside. "You did good work today. Real work. You potentially saved lives." James felt a swell of pride, but he kept his expression neutral. "Just doing my duty, sir." "That's exactly right," Blackwood said. "That's exactly what being a royal guard means. Not the ceremony. Not the uniform. The vigilance. The willingness to act when it matters. Your father would be proud." Those words hit James harder than any test or trial. He felt tears threatening, but held them back. After Blackwood left, James sat alone in the darkened barracks. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The pain. The sacrifice. The moments he'd wanted to quit. He thought about his father watching those guards all those years ago. About the dream that had been planted in a child's heart. That dream had become reality. But it was better than he'd imagined, because it wasn't just about wearing a uniform or standing at attention. It was about standing between danger and the people he'd sworn to protect. It was about mattering. James pulled out his phone and sent a message to his mother. He'd been too busy to call much. Too absorbed in his new life. "I love you, ma'am. I'm exactly where I need to be. Tell Emma I said hello. And tell her that dreams are worth fighting for." His mother's response came minutes later. "Your father is smiling down on you. We love you. Stay safe." James put the phone away. He'd take his position again tomorrow. And the day after. And the day after that. For as long as the royal family needed him. But tonight, for the first time since his father died, James felt complete. like all the broken pieces had finally come together. He wasn't just James Carter anymore. He was something more. Something his younger self couldn't have imagined. He was one of the best of the best. 2 years passed like water through James's hands. Each day brought the same routine. Wake before dawn. Polish his boots until he could see his reflection. Press his uniform until not a single wrinkle remained. March to his position. Stand for hours. Return. Sleep. Repeat. But within that routine, James had found something precious. Peace. He'd prevented 3 more security incidents in his time as a guard. Nothing as dramatic as the first, but each time, his vigilance had mattered. His training had proved its worth. The other guards had become his brothers. They didn't talk much during duty, but in the quiet moments, in the barracks at night, they shared things they'd never tell anyone else. Fears, dreams, losses. Mitchell had lost a sister to cancer. Harrison's father had been military, killed in Afghanistan. They all carried their own ghosts. All found purpose in this demanding, isolating, meaningful work. James's mother and sister visited London once. He met them on his day off, still feeling strange in civilian clothes. Emma had grown taller. She was 16 now, thinking about university. His mother looked older, but happier. Less worried. "You've changed," his mother said over lunch. "You seem settled. Content." James nodded. "I am. This is where I belong." Emma asked 100 questions about the palace, the royal family, the ceremonies. James answered what he could, keeping the classified details secret. But he told her about the tourists, the children who looked at him with awe, the feeling of being part of history.
Do you ever regret it?
His mother asked quietly. Giving up so much? James thought about it honestly. He'd given up the possibility of a normal life. Relationships were difficult when you worked such demanding hours. He'd missed family events, birthdays, holidays. He'd sacrificed his youth to this calling. No, he said finally. I don't regret it. Some people search their whole lives for meaning. I found mine. Not everyone is that lucky. His mother reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Your father would say the same thing. They parted that afternoon with long hugs. James returned to duty feeling grateful. His family understood now. They'd stopped worrying and started accepting. But that same week, something happened that tested everything James had become. He was on night duty at Windsor Castle. The shift was quieter than Buckingham Palace. Fewer tourists. More isolation. James stood at his post, the cold November air biting through his uniform. Around midnight, he heard footsteps. Not unusual. Security patrols were constant. But these footsteps sounded wrong, hesitant, uncertain. A figure emerged from the shadows. A young man, maybe 18. His clothes were dirty. His eyes were wild with fear and desperation. Please, the man whispered. Please help me. They're going to kill me. James's training screamed at him to alert security immediately. This was a breach. Potentially dangerous. He should raise the alarm. But something in the young man's eyes stopped him. Terror. Real, genuine terror. Step back, James said quietly. I'll call for help. No, they're watching. They're part of the security. I can't trust anyone, please. Just listen. James had seconds to make a decision. Break protocol and listen. Or follow orders and potentially hand this terrified kid over to whoever he was running from. He thought of Thompson. The young recruit who'd quit because he couldn't handle the pressure. This kid looked the same. Lost, desperate, human. Talk fast, James said, his eyes still scanning for threats. The young man explained quickly. He'd witnessed something he shouldn't have. A member of the palace staff involved in selling information. When they realized he knew, they tried to silence him. He'd been running for 2 days, hiding, not knowing who to trust. It sounded impossible, like a movie plot. But James's instincts told him the fear was real. He made a choice. Stay here. Don't move. James activated his emergency signal. Within seconds, his commanding officer arrived. James explained the situation quickly, professionally. He expected to be reprimanded for not raising the alarm immediately. Instead, his commander listened, called for specialized security, took the young man into protective custody. 3 days later, James was called into Major Blackwood's office. He expected the worst, a violation of protocol. Potential dismissal. Blackwood sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. The young man you helped. His story checked out. We found evidence of the security breach, he mentioned. Because of your quick thinking and your willingness to trust your instincts, we stopped a significant intelligence leak. James felt relief flood through him. I wasn't sure if I'd made the right call, sir. You made the human call, Blackwood said. That's what matters. We train you to be perfect, immovable, unbreakable, but we don't train you to be inhuman. You showed judgment, compassion. Those qualities matter just as much as discipline. It was the highest praise Blackwood had ever given anyone. That moment changed something in James. He realized that being a Royal Guard wasn't about being a statue. It was about being the best version of yourself. Strong, but not heartless. Disciplined, but not robotic. Perfect in execution, but human in judgment. The months that followed brought new challenges. A state visit from a foreign leader that required extra security. A royal wedding that drew millions of spectators. A bomb threat that turned out to be false, but had everyone on high alert for days. Through it all, James stood firm. He'd become exactly what he'd dreamed of. One of the elite few, one of the guards who protected not just people, but symbols, traditions, history. On the 3rd anniversary of his first day as a Royal Guard, James stood at his usual post. The morning was crisp and clear. Tourists were already gathering. The routine was familiar, comfortable. A little girl approached. She looked exactly like Emma had at that age. Wide-eyed. Curious. She stared up at James for a long moment. Then she whispered to her father, "He's a real hero, isn't he?" Her father smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. He really is." James felt something break inside his chest. Not painful, beautiful. Like a wall finally coming down. He thought of his father. Of standing outside this very palace as a child. Of the journey that had brought him from that moment to this one. All the pain had been worth it. All the sacrifice. All the doubt. Because standing here, protecting what mattered, being part of something greater than himself. James had found what every person searches for. Purpose. Meaning. Home. That night, lying in his bunk, James pulled out the letter he'd received 3 years ago. The one with the red wax seal. The one that had started everything. He read it again, smiling at the memory of that terrified, hopeful young man who'd opened it. Then he folded it carefully and put it away. He didn't need it anymore. The dream was no longer ahead of him. He was living it. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over Buckingham Palace, James Carter would take his position once again. He would stand perfectly still for hours. He would protect the royal family with his life. He would be exactly what his father had pointed to all. Those years ago, the best of the best, not because of the uniform or the ceremony or the title, but because he'd chosen something difficult and made it beautiful, because he'd turned suffering into strength, because he'd found a way to make his father's death mean something, and his own life matter. The young boy who'd watched the guards with wonder had become one of them. And in doing so, he'd become exactly who he was always meant to be. A guardian. A protector. A symbol of everything worth defending. James closed his eyes and fell asleep with a smile on his face. Tomorrow, he would stand guard again. And the next day, and the next for as long as duty called. For as long as the dream lived on.